Hello, my name is Xiomara Mayo Ingram, and I want to welcome you to our Emotional Cafe presentation tonight with the topic Let's Talk About Addiction. I am very glad to be here with you tonight, and again, thanks for opening this space for us to be able to introduce Emotional Cafe to you. As always, I always remind what Emotional Cafe is about. It's a virtual platform for everybody to be able to get the emotional support that they need. We discuss issues that usually are the ones holding us back and not allowing us to accomplish our goals. So that's what Emotional Cafe is about. It's your platform for you to access 24 hours a day, the 7 days of the week, so you can read the articles, you can just go back to the sessions, take notes on whatever topic we've discussed in any of the presentations, and benefit yourself enjoying your favorite hot drink. Here's my coffee. And you can do the same thing. You just choose what device, or if you want to watch it on your computer, if you want to follow us on YouTube, now you can also go and access the videos. And it's just a great opportunity to continue together building a stronger life, a better life, and to be able to accomplish more. That's what Emotional Cafe is about, for everybody to have a space that they can continue with their emotional growth. I also would like to remind you in this opportunity that if you have not subscribed for receiving our newsletter, our monthly newsletter, you're still on time. Go back to emotionalcafe.com, and on the right column you can just click there to subscribe to the newsletter. The only information that you're going to have to put there is your email. So just go ahead and do it so you can be receiving February's bulletin, February's newsletter that is going to be coming out very soon. So don't miss it. And finally, I want to remember that Emotional Cafe is totally free. You can invite your friends, you can invite your families, or people that you know, people that you think that might need it, people that you think that may not need it. I believe that we all need a little boost, a little help. So that's what Emotional Cafe is about. So just invite your friends, your relatives to enjoy Emotional Cafe as much as you are. And you're also invited to be part of Emotional Cafe community by becoming one of our sponsors. You can make your donations on the webpage. This is the reason why we have been able to open it and be free for everybody around the world to access. So feel free to go and help us with your donation. It can be a one-time donation, or it can be a regular donation every month. So just be part of it. We need you. Please be on board with Emotional Cafe, because you'll be part of providing so many different people around the world with the help they need. So let's talk about addictions. And usually I like telling you why I chose the topic that we are going to be presenting. Remember that you can also suggest any specific topic that you would like us to present. You can send your questions, and you can also participate on the chat. The chat is open, it's totally anonymous, so you can ask your questions, and I'll make sure that I can address them and answer them in the presentation. So why I chose the topic about addiction. Well, my main goal tonight is to be able to educate about the different ways in which addiction can be manifesting itself. Sometimes we having the idea that an addict is someone that is sleeping in the street, homeless, no job, all dirty. And I want to be able to break with this misinterpretation about addiction and educate that actually addiction can be living with us in the same house, and also provide orientation in case that you suspect that someone you love might be suffering from an addiction problem, or maybe you identify yourself tonight that you might be having an addiction problem. What to do, what kind of help you should be seeking, you should be getting. And that's what this session is about. And it's going to be really interesting, because probably some people read that I was going to be talking about addiction, and they thought of the common addiction that we always think of, illegal drugs, but you're gonna see that it's a little bit much more than that, because on today's presentation we're going to be seeing addiction from two important perspectives: the physiological perspective, which is when you use and ingest any alcohol or drugs, but also from the behavioral, from the process perspective, which is with activities, conducts, behavior. So that's going to be quite interesting, and that's the shocking part probably on tonight's presentation. As usual, what is addiction? I always go with the definitions. What is addiction? And I try to choose some of the definitions that actually do not fit addiction only in the perspective of using or ingesting alcohol and drugs, but a little worldwide and much more wider perspective, which is what now the World Health Organization and the American Society of Addiction Medicine are considering. The World Health Organization says that addiction is a compulsive, uncontrollable dependence on a substance, a habit, or practice. Listen again: a substance, a habit, or practice to such a degree that you're continuously trying to use or continuously trying to engage in the activity despite the adverse consequences that it might cause. Either obtaining it or seizing it or stopping doing may cause severe emotional and mental and physiological reactions. So that's what addiction is. But it's really interesting how it refers to a substance, a habit, or a practice. And these are the key words to consider on the main definition tonight. Compulsion. What is compulsion? When you want to continue doing it. Uncontrollable. You think you can control it, but somehow it's controlling you. Dependence. You're depending. You need this. A substance, habit, or practice. So here we're not only referring to something that you smoke or you drink, but rather than that, we're also talking about things you do, activities themselves. Craving. You have this craving for doing more or for using more. Continue use or practice, continue practice continuously despite adverse consequences. That means that even by having to face some negative impact, you still want to continue doing that, or you still continue doing that, whatever it is. Dysphoria, which is the anxiety, depression, and restlessness levels, progressive and fatal. Distortion in our mind, we totally disconnect from reality, and denial. This is really huge, because when there's addiction, there's always denial. There's always a reason why I do this. There's always an excuse. There's always a justifying why is it that I do what I do. And now with the American Society of Addiction Medicine, the definition that they provide us with was that addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain, reward, motivation, and memory. Dysfunction leads to characteristics that are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations, and this is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing the reward or the relief by a substance use and or other behaviors. And that is when it gets really interesting. Listen to this. Addiction is characterized by inability to abstain, to be constant when you abstain, the impairment in behavioral control, the craving or increased hunger for drugs or rewarding experiences. Check out how when we're saying rewarding experiences, we are actually referring to something that goes beyond the drugs that you get to drink or the drugs that you get to smoke. We're talking about rewarding experiences, activities. Diminished recognition of significant problems with one's behaviors and interpersonal relationships, and a dysfunctional emotional response. People that are suffering from addiction are totally disconnected from their emotions, not only from the reality but also from their emotions. Therefore, their interpersonal relationships get to be so affected that they end up totally isolated. And you're going to see that when we go over the signs later on. Other definitions that I brought for you today are that is the psychological and physiologic dependence on a substance or practice that is beyond voluntary control. Addiction is generally considered a condition that involves two factors: a compulsive behavior pattern and an altered physiologic state that requires continued use of the drug or the practice. Again, practice is referring to activity. And you might be asking, Xiomara, where are you taking us with this? What kind of activities are you talking about? Don't worry, we'll get there in a minute. When we're talking about behavioral addiction, correctly refers to a compulsion to engage in a natural reward, which is a behavior that is usually rewarding, such desirable or something, but despite the adverse consequences. And addiction, this is a very important consideration that I wanted to share with you, that the term was partially referred to the word dependence. Now, right now, what they're doing is that they're using the word dependence when they are referring to alcohol and drugs that you either use, ingest, or smoke. But they have used the word addiction, and they have extended this term to refer to mood-altering behaviors or activities. So now you can see that the DSM-5, which is actually the diagnostic of mental and statistics disorders, is referring to dependence, to be specific about when it's referring to alcohol or drugs, like illegal drugs or drugs that you either drink or smoke or use, and using addiction to refer to behavior. Addiction is a condition that results when a person ingests a substance or engages in an activity that can be normally pleasurable, but the continued use of it or the continued doing of this activity becomes compulsive and interferes with ordinary life responsibilities such as work, relationships, or health. The users might not be aware that their behavior is totally out of control and causing problems for themselves and others. And this is a part that you might be asking, and I always like bringing to you some where it's coming from. But before I go to where it's coming from, let's make clear that we are referring on today's topic, let's talk about addiction, two types of addictions. This is what the researchers have shown, that there are two types of addiction. The substance addictions or the substance dependence. This is when you're using or ingesting psychoactive substances. And we're also going to talk about that because usually people think that I might refer just to cocaine or alcohol or something like that. But we're going to be talking also about antidepressants, sleeping pills, and many others that are also considered psychoactive substances. And the second type of addiction is the process addiction, which is more known as behavioral addiction. And this one, let me tell you what this is about. It's when a person does not use or ingest any chemical substance, and yet their lives are negatively affected by the dysfunctional pattern of behavior impacting their global functioning as well as their relationships, as their interpersonal relationships. So when we're talking about process addiction or behavioral addiction, which is the same, we are talking about people that might not use any drugs, any psychoactive chemical substance at all, and yet they have this dysfunctional pattern of behavior in their lives that is already affecting how they're functioning, what is called the global functioning, and their personal relationships. Some examples, and here it goes: gambling, shopping, sex, among others. And you're going to be surprised of the whole list that I brought to share with you. And I think that's when you're going to be realizing, oh my goodness, I was so lost. And that's when it comes again to the part of educating and helping you understand what addiction is really about. So, wrapping it up, we have two types of addiction: the substance addictions and the process addictions or behavioral addiction. And it is important to understand that when we're talking about behavioral addiction, when we're talking about process addiction, it has nothing to do with morality. Sometimes people tend to think that addicts are people that has no morals and they have no values or anything, and this is important that we understand that it's beyond just seeking for the pleasure. It has nothing to do with a person's morality or strength or character. It is considered a disease, and it is considered a brain disease because of the way it affects your chemical balance within your brain. So most addictive behaviors are not related to the exposure or the physical tolerance, but it has to do with how people deal with emotions and stress. So again, it's beyond just seeking something for the pleasure that it causes. It's more about how it makes me feel when I do this, how it makes me feel when I use, how it makes me feel when I go shopping, how it makes me feel when I watch porn. And so it goes. The list continues going. Now, to understand addiction, we need to also know what are the possible factors that influence addiction, because it is amazing how people can come from the same environment, the same family, or the same circumstances, kind of similar, and yet one person ends up being addicted or being an addict and the other person didn't. I used the illustration the other day for like when people grew up in broken families, for instance, and it's just amazing how this person ends up being an addict, and this other person in this other broken family, that was the motivation to do better, to accomplish more, and to have a better life. So again, there are many factors, and these are some of the ones that research have shown that it seems to have some influence on addiction being developed. The genetic factor, and this is interesting because it cannot be totally proven that genetic is what causes addiction, but yet it cannot be discarded at all. So there's a common phrase that we use that said there's an addict in every family. I don't know if you've heard it, but especially in the addiction field, counseling setting, we used to have that phrase that says, in every good family, there's an addict. And what it means is that addiction runs pretty much in every family. When you look at their history, at the past family history, it's just amazing that there's always some sort of manifestation of addiction in that family. It can be the parents, it can be grandparents, it can be an uncle, it can be a cousin, but there's always someone that is suffering from this disease. And understanding that the genetic factor is there makes sense in many cases. So again, it's not something that is 100% accurate, but at the same time, it cannot be put aside. And when you're actually doing a family intervention, or you're having an evaluation to find out if someone needs an addiction treatment, this is part of what you look at, the family history. Now, another possible factor is home and family. And again, as I was saying, it's not 100% that because of the family you have, you'll end up being an addict. Again, we can have two brothers within the same family, and one of them ends up suffering from addiction and the other one does not. So again, however, we have to consider that it's within the family system that we learn our values, that we learn our behaviors. And if we are in a family that has certain limitations or problems, to have positive emotional communication, to deal with problems, to be problem solving oriented, all these are things that are nurturing the kids when they're growing up. And if that is not the case, at the same time, a kid that is coming and growing up with a low self-esteem might be affected by the dysfunctional pattern of behavior in the family. So home and family is another one of the possible factors that influence addiction. Peer pressure and school environment. You might think that school is supposed to be one of the places that are supposed to be safe for kids, and I can tell. And when I used to go to school, it was probably around 30 years ago, and yet I can tell you that there was already addiction in school. There was already cases, there was already kids that were using or already with some addictive patterns that at that point I didn't know exactly what it was. But again, it's something that we see it over and over. We see how sometimes because of the peer pressure we tend to have a drink or smoke or do things just to be cool, just to be part of the group, and that can be something that then gets the person hooked on the new pattern of behavior. So peer and school environment, peer pressure and school environment is considered another one of the possible factors. Early use, it's also another important one. Why? Because the young people, young teenagers, young kids, they don't have all the knowledge to be able to categorize what they are exposed to and be able to tell what's right from wrong. They have a very distorted way of seeing things, and dealing with their own emotions sometimes is really overwhelming. So by starting early to use or to experiment, it just opens the door for them to actually connect with the substance and just get hooked or with an addictive behavior. One example of this is porn. Usually porn addicts are people that have been exposed to porn at a very early age, and therefore that's what they think it's right and that's what they connect with. It's really sad, and I'm going to be able to tell you a little bit more. I had the opportunity when I was working as an addiction counselor to see many of these manifestations of addiction, behavioral addiction, that are just amazing to a point you wouldn't believe. But I'll be able to share a little bit more about that. And finally, the other possible factor besides genetic and home and family and school and early use is the method of administration. Depending on what is it that you use, you'll be more predisposed to continue using than others. So that's also another factor that influence addiction. Now, where does addiction come from? There's some theories of causation of what causes it, and this is important to know because if you at what point you're seeking for professional help, it is important that you know what is behind of the treatment, how they approach the addiction. Like for instance, some theories of says that it's a moral model. The moral model considers addiction as the result of human weakness, and that this only shows that the person has not great moral and values, and if this person could be stronger and spiritually stronger, then they can break their addiction. So they don't consider addiction as a disease, but rather than that, a reflection of a human weakness. The disease model, which is really important, is the one that considers addiction an illness and considers that addiction comes as a result of the impairment of healthy neurochemical or behavioral processes. So they do see addiction as a disease, pretty much like diabetes or cancer or any other illness that we might be facing. The genetic model considers that addiction comes from the family. It just runs in the family, and it comes genetically from one generation to the next. Now, the cultural model recognizes the influence of the culture on some people to become addicts or not. And it is important here to show that the reason why this is based, like in some countries, I can say this for my own experience, in some Hispanic countries, usually they introduce kids at a very early age to alcohol. And they consider that by introducing alcohol to them, they're becoming a man. And therefore, you might find more levels of alcoholics in countries like this than in others that do not share that type of cultural behavior. So the cultural model is important because it looks at the culture, but again, it's just seeing it from that perspective. Now, the final model that I have, which is the most important one and the one that I want to address in case that at some point you're seeking for professional help, is the blended model. And what they do is that they consider all the other ones. They consider that addiction is a disease. They consider that there's a genetic factor. They consider that what culture this person is coming from, what is the setting, what is his surrounding or her surroundings, and what is the values and principles that this person has in order to work with all these different models and get the best approach for the addiction treatment. So again, if you are seeking for professional help, this is something to consider in order to get the best help possible, because all these factors are important. Now, Xiomara, how do we get, because sometimes I might just, have a smoke every once in a while, or I might have some drinks, or I go to the casino and gamble a little bit, but no big deal. How do I know if I am an addict? There are 4 stages or categories that are the ones that we usually work with when we're trying to evaluate if a person is having an addictive behavior or an addiction problem. And these 4 categories are use, misuse, abuse, and dependence. Dependence or addiction itself. And it's important to know this because usually you can be someone that is at the use stage and you can stay there. At one point you can be in the misuse stage and realize that, oh my gosh, I kind of went overboard, and then go back to simply using. You can go to abusing, but it's important that you know that you don't get to be in the dependency or addiction stage all of a sudden. You go from using, misusing, abusing to dependence. So let me go over the 4 stages because this is important that you understand. The use stage, the stage or category of use, it's simply that the person uses a substance or does the activity in a way that is socially accepted. No big deal, no repercussions. I can do it or not do it and I'm fine. I can have a drink or not have a drink and I'm totally fine. So this is usually when people experiment and they try a drug or something. You sometimes can hear someone that says, oh, I tried that drug but didn't like it or whatever, didn't do me good, period. It's over. No big deal. Nothing else happened. Now, the second stage, which is misuse, this is when you are taking a drug or alcohol or engaging in the activity in more quantities, in damaging quantities or in more quantities other than the one that you were prescribed or using, and you start developing some sort of tolerance. You need more in order to have the same effect that you used to have. So in order to get that effect, you need to have more because you're being more tolerant. But you can still feel that you're controlling the effect, and you can kind of anticipate the results. So again, you can see that maybe you have a blackout at a point, but that was it. You stopped. No big deal. That was a misuse. Now let's talk about the third stage, which is the abuse. And with the abuse, we see that the person continue using alcohol or drugs or engaging in the activity. Again, I'm doing this reference because I'm referring to both the substance dependence and the substance abuse as well as the activity or behavior addiction. So the person continues using drugs or alcohol, or the person continues engaging in the activity in spite of the negative consequences. For instance, here some of the signs that we can see are that the individual becomes preoccupied with the mood swings and how to kind of hide it, how to deal with it. They start spending more money in whatever the activity is or whatever the substance they're using. There's an increase in the frequency either of the activity or of the use. The isolation starts. They start losing control. They can feel it. Their lifestyle begins to change. They rearrange their life to be able to continue with the use or the activity. They start using or doing the activity in order to cope with emotions such as sadness, guilt, anger, fear, anxiety. They might be sneaky about getting or using or trying to hide it. They might be lying or being really sneaky. They might become very irritable, very sensitive, or very angry easily. The rationalization and projection occurs more frequently, and they start kind of going against their value system. So these are some of the signs of the abuse stage or abuse category when you're dealing. Sometimes we've had the opportunity to work with someone that, even though it's not 100% with the signs of dependency or addiction, is already in abuse. And someone already with the abuse category, someone already showing signs of abusing either substance or an activity, is someone that usually can go into a recovery process in order to rechannel their emotions and be able to continue with the right and appropriate behavior and path for their lives before getting too far to the point that it's an addiction and it's even harder for them to be able to find recovery. The final stage, and again, this is the one that you get after going through use, misuse, abuse, and finally dependency or addiction. This one is characterized by repeated compulsive seeking or use either of the substance or engaging of the activity despite the adverse social, psychological, and physical consequences. And it is amazing because this is the point when you see the extreme compulsion, you see the desire to engage in the activity or the desire to use becomes more important. They totally lose control. They experience physical and emotional problems. They totally disconnect from reality. They feel very alone, very isolated, and they are suffering from a complete lack of motivation. And that's when usually they need some sort of extreme intervention in order to find recovery. So again, if you are looking at this presentation and you're thinking about someone that you love, or maybe one of your kids, or maybe yourself, there are 4 stages, there are 4 categories. And again, maybe you're worrying about something that yet it's not a problem, but yet you're seeing the signs that it's already an abuse. And here comes the treat of the night, because I have the list of the 10 most common addictions. If I ask, what do you think will be the 10 most common addiction, you might think, oh my goodness, oh I know, but let me tell you that you'll be blown away with the 10 most common addictions. This is a list that was put together after many researches. Let's see if my chat here it's working, because remember, you can ask your questions if you feel like it. But again, the most common addictions, there's 10, but I still have others that are important to mention today. But the first one, you're not going to believe what number 1 is. Alcohol. Yep, alcohol. Alcohol is considered a drug. As a matter of fact, in 1930s, when at that point that was a drug and it was forbidden for people to get alcohol. You remember all that. In 1935, that's when Alcoholics Anonymous appears and they start treating alcoholism. At that point, there was no word for any other addictive behavior or any other drugs, just simply alcohol, because that's what they were dealing with. But after the war and many other drugs that they started introducing in order to help the soldiers to cope with everything, and then it just went through the market. Then they became around the 70s with the term addiction, and they included both all those other drugs and alcohol, because what they did was that the addiction was a word that could kind of put them all together. So alcohol the addiction to alcohol is the number one of the list. And probably this is the one of the reasons why it's because it's socially accepted. It's considered a social lubricant. You want to relax, you have a drink. You want to go talk to someone, you have a drink. You go to a club, you have a drink. You want to dance and you're shy, you have a drink. So it's just amazing how people promote it. We see it on the TV, we see it everywhere. We see the commercials. They even show that by drinking you'll be more powerful, and you'll have more fun, and you'll be more successful. So since socially it's so promoted and so well accepted, then people just drink their fears away. People just drink as much as possible because they don't see that they are having an addiction problem, because it's something that is legal. It's something that, as long as they have the appropriate age, they can go anywhere and buy it. So yes, alcohol is the number one on the list. Number two, smoking. And here's the part that it says that more than to the cigarettes themselves, the people that are smokers are addicted to the nicotine, to what it has inside. So smoking is also kind of socially accepted, although since probably 15 years ago, it's been more, there's been huge commercials and promotions kind of explaining the negative impact of smoking, and telling the disadvantages and the possibilities and all the diseases that it causes. So they're kind of creating more awareness, and they have proven that it's very bad for your health. However, smoking is the number two in the list. Number three is drug addiction, and here this is when we include both illegal substances and legal drugs. Illegal substances like cocaine and heroin and crack and many different illegal drugs, but there's also the legal drugs, and this is referring to the sleeping pills, or to those that if you're depressed you go to the doctor and they prescribe it, but if you notice you cannot go and get them without a prescription, because they are legal drugs, but they are so strong that you still need a prescription from a doctor. Be careful with that. Sometimes people can suffer from addiction without even realizing that they are an addict, because sometimes I had the opportunity to work with people and they'll say, oh no, I don't use any drugs. And when you're making the screening and kind of asking them about their sleeping habits and their eating and all that, they will tell you, oh, I take something such and such to sleep. I cannot sleep if I don't take my pill. There it is. That's one addiction. And it's just amazing, because when they are taking the medication away, it takes them weeks and sometimes even months for their body to be able to go to sleep without this drug. So again, drug addiction is the number three, and we are referring here not only to illegal substances but also to those legal drugs that you get prescribed by the doctor. Number four, gambling. And this is the moment that some people say, oh, I don't gamble, or if I gamble I go to the casino, or I play this, I play that, but it's not a big deal. I won't go bankruptcy because I play, or because I do this. Let me tell you, some people with gambling, and this is something that I got to see when I was studying, doing all my hours for counseling in this field, and they showed a scan of a brain of a gambler and another one of a person addicted to cocaine, and it's just amazing what the brain of the gambler presented when the person went into a casino and heard all the machines and was just there in that environment. It was just amazing to see that the same thing that happened in his brain without using any psychoactive substance was exactly the same that you could see that happened to a brain exposed to cocaine in the case of a cocaine addict. So yeah, gambling is the number four, and there are people that have gone bankruptcy, totally bankrupt because of their gambling. Some people go to the casinos and they use the money for the mortgage, they use the money for their kids' groceries, and it's just amazing because they always think that they're going to hit it big, that they're going to be lucky. This time they're going to be lucky. And research shows that if they put together all the money that they have been playing in a casino before actually winning something, it's just amazing that it's always much more what they have played than what they have really won. So gambling is the number 4. Now, with this one, you're going to be totally surprised. Number 5, food addiction. Xiomara, food addiction? Are you serious? We need to eat. We need to eat to be healthy. We need to eat to survive. Eating is such an enjoyable experience. How can you say that eating can be a problem, that eating can be an addiction? Yes, food addiction. A food addict is that person that copes with whatever emotion, whatever stress, whatever feeling they're feeling through eating. They try to use food to fill that void inside. It's just amazing. And they have usually very low self-esteem, very high levels of depression and anxiety, and they just try to hide it by eating and eating. They isolate. It's just amazing, all the different signs that they show. So yes, food addiction, it's very common. It's more common than what you probably thought it was, and it's the number 5 on the list. Now, number 6, video games. Yeah, video games. It's just amazing how people are so addicted to the video games to the point that they even have and this was a surprise for me. I didn't even know that there are games that are like a virtual life that you have, and it's just amazing because I got the opportunity to see in real life people that didn't have their own identity. They have their fiction identity from the game, and their whole life was based on what they're playing online. It was huge. They couldn't interact with others, they couldn't socialize, they couldn't even sit down and have dinner with their family. It's just amazing. So video games, the most addictive video games are the ones where players assume the identity of the character in the game and they are able to interact with other players because they totally confuse reality and they think that is their reality. So yes, video games. And the number 7, listen to this one, internet addiction. Can you be addicted to internet? Something so great, something so good, amazing, how we can travel, how we can browse, how we can find everything that you need to know. You just Google it or you just go to YouTube and you learn. So the internet is such a wonderful resource. But yet, listen to this. When all you can do is be on your device, checking the social media or checking Google or checking something to the point that you are in a restaurant and you are with the device, or you are in a party and you are with your tablet and you're always doing things online, then you might have an internet addiction. So when a person wants to be online all the time, check it out, because that might be something to be worried about. Number 8, sex addiction. And you might think, oh, but sex, it's so great. Why it's going to be an addiction? Let me tell you this. We're not referring to normal sex between a couple, between two people that are having a relationship or they're enjoying their sexual life or they're sexually active. We're talking about a person that is likely engaging in risky sexual behaviors to feel their compulsion. They go and pick up on strangers because they simply need to have sex, just to kind of feel that compulsion that they're needing. So they go getting prostitutes, they go having affairs, they pick up strangers in the streets. It's just amazing. They expose themselves. So that's when promiscuity really hit it. So when we're talking about sex addiction, we're not talking about how often you can have sexual relation with your partner or your spouse or significant other, but basically we're referring to that compulsion to go and have sex just for for the fun of having it, regardless who it is with, regardless if it's safe, and simply just picking on anybody. Number 9, shopping. For some people, going to the store and even filling those credit cards to the maximum, even spending the money of paying the rent, or simply because they are upset or sad or depressed or anxious or feeling guilty, they go to the store and they try to fill that void by buying. So usually, if you are one of those persons that actually you find yourself doing the math on your finances and they never come square clear, you might have that problem if you are addicted to go shopping. If going shopping, you do it because you're not feeling well and you do it and then you feel better, check it out, because you might be having a shopping addiction. And number 10, the 10th most common addiction is work addiction. Workaholism. We've talked about this in a previous session, so if you want to just go back and review what the workaholics are hiding, because it's usually not to deal with their personal issues, with their fears, with their emotions, and they have their priority to be their work, and their life is always evolving around work. So if you are that person and you have been thinking that it's just great because you're really working hard and you're providing, but actually your whole life is around your work, you might have a work addiction. So again, I'm gonna name them all. Number 1, alcohol. Number 2, smoking. Number 3, drugs. Number 4, gambling. 5, food addiction. Number 6, video games. Number 7, internet addiction. Number 8, sex. Number 9, shopping. And number 10, working. Now, other process addictions, other behavioral addictions: addiction to porn, addiction to sports. Some people are addicted to watching sports and they don't go out of their house. They don't want to go to work. They go to work and they're trying to check it out online because they are addicted to sports. Others are addicted to play something, being a sport person. So there's also addiction to television, addiction to new technologies. There are people that they're announcing a new technology and they're already following up and they're already making a line weeks before it's coming out just to have it because I need to have it. Addiction to love, addiction to fantasy. People that are totally disconnected from reality and they're always expecting something to happen that is only happening in their minds. And addiction to relationships of any kind. And this is the part when we can be addicted to a friend, or we can be in an addictive relationship. And again, that's when codependency hits. And there's also another presentation on codependency. But if you find yourself being really possessive and compulsive about your friends or your spouse or partner, you might have an addiction to relationships. Now, it is important that if you have someone that is an addict and is seeking for treatment and you are assisting this person or trying to help them recover, you have to consider that there are stages of change. Change doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that just because you tell that this person is having an addiction problem, this person is going to change all of a sudden. No, it takes different stages. And this is important for you to know, because sometimes we tend to think that they're probably not doing their best effort, or they probably don't love me enough, because if they love me, they could do this. Listen to the stages of change. The first stage is pre-contemplation, in which the person is not yet acknowledging that there's a problem behavior that needs to be changed. Number 2 is the contemplation, when the person realizes that, yeah, there's a problem, but they're not quite ready yet to change, to make the changes needed. Now, number 3 is preparation. The person is getting ready to change. It's not changing yet, but it's getting ready to change. It's internalizing and accepting that changes need to be made, and it's more willing to do those changes. Number 4 is the action, This is when they start changing the behavior. They start following the recommendations, they start following a plan, they start putting actions together to change. And number 5 is maintenance, in which they continue with the new behaviors, they continue with the changes, and sometimes, I have to say it, the relapse stage, which is when the person goes back to the old pattern, to the old behavior. And this is important because if you think about it, the stages of change, it's not only for someone that is suffering from addiction. This is pretty much what we all go through ourselves. Pre-contemplation, we don't even realize that there's a problem. Contemplation, we kind of know there's a problem, but we're not sure we want to change it, or we want to address it now, maybe we want to address it later. Preparation, yeah, I need to change, I need to do something, I cannot go on like this. Action, when we start putting actions together bit by bit to make the changes. And maintenance, when we try to stick to that new behavior, to the new patterns. Or relapse, when we just go back to the old pattern. So you can see how this can apply to all of us. What recovery offers the person that is suffering from addiction? You remember how I always talk about the areas of your life and finding balance? That's part of what a recovery process can show you, that all the areas of your lives are important, that you don't only work on one, on the relationship or only the work, but rather you combine them all, because we all need to be able to take care of all the different areas of our lives, and that's what recovery is about. Here in this process of emotional growth that we're having with Emotional Cafe, that's part of what we promote. And these areas of our lives are our career, our finances, fun and leisure, family, our physical health, our emotional health, our spirituality, education or academic growth, our social relationships, and our love relationship with our spouse or life partner. Now, it's almost time to wrap it up, and I want to give you and share with you some final considerations that are extremely important. Addiction does not respect gender, age, ethnicity, religious beliefs, professions, or social class. It doesn't matter who you are, you can still be suffering from addiction. It doesn't matter what you believe in. It doesn't matter what type of professional you are, or what your career field is, or where you're coming from. You can still be suffering from addiction. Addiction is a disease, and as such, it has nothing to do with affection or feelings. Stop with the, if he loves me, he'll stop. If she loves me, she'll stop. Oh, she's gonna stop because she loves me. Or he's not gonna do it again because he loves me. Stop with that. It has nothing to do with feelings or affection. It's a disease. And this is something that we need to be aware of. It doesn't matter if it's using a substance. It doesn't matter if it's acting it out. If it's a behavior, it is still a disease. The solution, it's not to ignore or to hide it or to try to evade it, not to talk about it. The real solution is acceptance. To accept. Do not underestimate the addictive behavior. You have to seek for professional help. You can find recovery. Now, if you suspect that your partner, your spouse, is having an addiction problem, there's help. All you need to do is reach out for help. If you suspect that maybe one of your children is having an addiction problem, there is help. If you realize that you might be the one that is having an addiction problem, there's also help. Recovery is a process of change through which an individual achieves abstinence and improved health, wellness, and quality of life. The process is unique to each person. Now, let me tell you about what I had the opportunity to see when I was working in the addiction field. When we have someone suffering from addiction, the family system is also sick. The family system is also affected. So usually when an addict goes into a recovery process, the family, the ones that are close to this person, have also have to be part of that recovery process and find recover from their codependence. This is really important that we understand it, because as I was explaining, when we have an addict, sometimes the family becomes addicted to this addict or to this behavior or to rescue this person. So in order to break all these patterns, they need to work together in a recovery process. Now sometimes it's just amazing. I had the opportunity to work with different types of addicts, and I had the opportunity to work with behavioral addicts, people with behavioral addictive behaviors, and that never ever use any substance. And yet I can tell you some of them found recovery and some of them didn't. So it doesn't matter if it's a substance dependence or if it's a behavioral, recovery is possible. You just need to go and find the appropriate help. There are different approaches to deal with addiction. There's amazing recovery programs out there. There's some intensive inpatient treatment programs. These are the facilities that are prepared to hold. They're like an addiction hospital. It's not really quite a hospital, but it's a place for them to have all the group therapies and individual sessions that they need, and group sessions, and to have a closer approach. But this also is so good to take them away from their environment in order to detox and stop with some of the influences that they might be having that could interfere with the process. So an intensive inpatient treatment is something for you to consider if you think the person that you live with or your kids or someone is suffering from addiction. Now let's say that you cannot just drop everything and go to an intensive patient program, that maybe you need something that you can still go to work or that you can still do other things. Well, there's outpatient programs in which you go to specific facilities in which they will work with you or with whoever you're taking in an outpatient scenery for you to be able to do that. And they're also effective. I've been able to see and work with people that were able to recover and continue on the recovery process, but they started without having to be in an inpatient program, but they took the outpatient program. Also, there's some individual counseling that you can also go to. They're great, amazing professionals that work, counselors that work with addiction, that have amazing knowledge, great expertise, and that you can benefit also, or your family can benefit from it. However, I have to say that when considering help for someone already being an addict, it is best to have something intensive, and just going once a week or once a month or once every 2 weeks might not be what will cause the results, might not be what will bring the best results in the recovery process. However, go to the professional, talk about the program, talk about the plan, and see what fits best. Finally, the self-help groups. Look, you can Google them. You can find them everywhere. There's all kind of groups. There's AA for Alcoholic Anonymous. There's NA for Narcotics Anonymous. There's DA for Debtors Anonymous, people with problems with money, and there's Gamblers Anonymous. There's CODA, which is codependency. There's all kinds of groups depending on what your substance preference is or what your behavior, addictive behavior preference is. There's a group everywhere at all times. There are even groups that have sessions 24 hours a day, and it's just amazing the service that they give. So again, it's totally free, and this is an amazing support for you or for your loved one in the recovery process. Again, recovery is it's something possible. Do not underestimate addiction. And again, remember that all you need to do is seek for help. Oops, before we go, I have a question. Please allow me to answer it. It says, my son is addicted to the marijuana, but he did not want to accept it. What I can do to help? Well, there's a phrase that says that usually when you try to intervene your own loved ones, you don't succeed. You need the assistance of a professional one, and you can also get assistance from someone that is already in recovery but was an addict, because this person knows exactly how strong the denial can be, but they've been there. They will be able to break that denial. They will be able to relate to this person and to know exactly how this person thinks. So if you want to help your son, my recommendation will be to get assistance from either a professional counselor or someone from the groups. Sometimes you call them and they'll go and have the intervention, have the confrontation with you, be there. Sometimes they'll tell their stories. Sometimes they'll tell what they were going through, what they were doing. Sometimes they will invite them to a meeting. They will say, hey, let's just go to a meeting. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. But maybe, who knows, maybe you can relate to what we have to say. And it might be a great opportunity for your son to go to a group and listen to other people that needed to use the marijuana to deal with whatever issues they were having. That's what drugs and addiction is really about. It's about coping with how I feel. It's about how I needed to relax, how I needed to feel good, how I needed to deal with this. And that's when the problem is, because the truth is that the only thing we need is our emotional resources to cope with whatever we're dealing, to be happy, to enjoy life. And if you need something besides that, that's when the problem is really hitting. So take that into consideration. You can get that assistance from people from the groups, and they'll be more than willing to help you totally free, or just get the assistance from a counselor that can have the appropriate intervention for the confrontation, to be able to have the person affected to realize that they might be having a problem. That's all it takes, to have the doubt, to have them think twice and listen to what they have to say, because right there is when you're putting that little seed in their hearts and in their minds, and they might consider, they might look at the areas of their lives, they might look at themselves and say, I wonder what they have to say, and that might be the door opening for a greater help. I hope I answer your question. And my dear friends, it's time for us to go. It's time for us to finish, but next week we'll be here Thursday at 8 o'clock. I'll be expecting to see you, and invite your friends, invite your relatives, and follow us on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Have a great evening.